listening to.
Yes, so welcome everyone back to the Israel Dialogues. It is a pleasure to join with you all on this sunny November day here in Toronto. We have a wonderful presentation this morning about Achdut, about unity, about world solidarity. And our guest just reminded me of how well we know each other because Elon's better half was the dean of the Jerusalem campus of HUCJAR for many years, including the years that I studied in Israel. And when Rabbi Nama Kelman, who was the dean of the campus, it was Tisha B'Av, and we had the day off, and we were invited, or she was invited, to teach and to present at the Pardes Institute of Jewish Studies, which is where I'd studied for the year before I went to HUCJAR. And I went with Dean Kelman down to Pardes, and I was her cheerleader there because she was not she is incredibly well known in our movement, beloved and respected and really looked up to. But in the slightly more from moderate right area section of Jerusalem where we were teaching, she wasn't as well known a figure. And it was my pleasure to cheer her on and to learn from her then and to learn from her for many years. And so it's a lovely little closing circle to come back now and have the opportunity to learn from her Bashar, from Elon. And I'm very excited to learn with you all this morning. And so, having given you that little taste of how small the Jewish world is, that you can log in and find out that you're quite well acquainted with someone, I'm going to hand it over to Holy Blossom's past president, Mark Anshin, I believe, to do our introduction this morning.
Thank you, Rabbi Kate, and welcome everyone, and particularly delighted to have with us a dear friend of mine from many years, Ilan Mizrahi. And I'll just briefly introduce Ilan, and then turn it over to him for our presentation, followed by our usual Q&A discussion with our panel members, David and John and myself. And then we'll open it up to Q&A from the rest of you. So if you do have questions, please post them in the Q&A section, and we'll bring them to Ilan's attention as we near the end of today's presentation. Ilan Mizrahi is a Jerusalem-based consultant in the areas of Jewish peoplehood in Israel, Israel diaspora relations. He's served in various executive roles in the past, including the International Department of Medlitz, a Center for Jewish Zionist Education, the Charles Brofman Center, Masa. He was the executive director, the CEO, the founding CEO of Masa, which is now a well-known program of the Jewish Agency dealing with gap year abroad for college-age students and high school students. He received his BA and his MA from Hebrew University in Education and Jewish Thought, and he received a doctorate degree from the JTS, the Jewish Theological Seminary in New York City. His dissertation was Encounters Between American Jews and Israelis and American Jewish Summer Camps. In recent years, Ilan has taught at the University of Haifa, at the Schechter Academic Institution in Jerusalem as well. He's a community activist in Jerusalem. He's chair of the Jerusalem Intercultural Center, and he's a volunteer at the newly established National Library in Jerusalem. Author of 3 books. He's married to Rabbi Nama Kelman. Rabbi K just talked at great length about her. He's a father of 3 and a grandfather of 6 children, and again, a good friend of mine. I'd like to turn it over to Ilan, please.
So, good afternoon, Toronto. We are actually in the same time zone, even though I'm Jerusalem-based, but in recent years, I'm also slightly New York-based. Since I have 3 grandchildren in the Washington Heights neighborhood of northern Manhattan, and it requires me to come here to do some babysitting. As my son-in-law is a professor of Talmud at the Jewish Theological Seminary, the place I got my PhD, and my daughter is an urban planner in the city of New York. So we go back and forth, and it so happened to be that when this session was scheduled, that I'm here. so we don't have to. I don't have to say good evening, and we're in the same place. But my heart is in Jerusalem, even if my body is now in New York. And my reflections on the topic that we're going to discuss, which is the impact of, or some of the effects of October 7th on Jewish peoplehood. While I do have a kind of a global perspective, I also talk about the subject from a perspective of someone who was born, raised, lived, and works in Israel, and I see this also from the Israeli perspective as well. As a matter of fact, my last book is a novel. It was my first novel, which is focused on. It's called Hashlicha, the emissary, and it's a story about a young Jewish Israeli woman, single woman, who travels to New York in the 1980s as an emissary, as a shlicha of the World Zionist Organization, to bring the message of Israel to diaspora Jews, and things happened there, not exactly as she expected, including a love story with a young American Jewish scholar. So if you're interested in hearing about the novel, I can talk about that later. But I would like to take us back to some of the more difficult moments we experienced in the last 2 years. And the term, but I'll start by saying that the term Jewish peoplehood that is often used in these conversations is very hard to define. I've been involved in many conversations and symposia and various publications trying to define what Jewish peoplehood means. It's a very rare use of the term peoplehood. We know what a people is, we know what Jewish is, but Jewish peoplehood is actually not an easy term to define. So I would say that for the purpose of our conversation, I see Jewish peoplehood in two layers. The foundation is actually descriptive. It's just a term that says who we are. We are an ethnic group. We are a tribe. We are some kind of a global collective of people. That Jewish is our common denominator, and Jewish peoplehood is what organizes us as a group and gives us the set of terms and references in order to figure out who we are and how different we are from one another. But then there's also a higher level in this hierarchy, and that is more prescriptive. The Jewish peoplehood is actually a value. It's a concept, and I would even dare say it's an ideology in which we believe in the idea that there's something special that connects us to one another, not only from the perspective of destiny, from the perspective of perspective of fate, that we have experienced all kinds of things together, usually with also some traumatic aspects to it, but also as a destiny, something that binds us together because we have a purpose in this world as a collective. And we want to actualize this purpose as much as possible, and that is our role in the world. So Jewish people has that upper layer that you can accept or reject, but I think it's important to recognize it. Another term that comes into these conversations that is also ambiguous and hard to define is Israel-diaspora relations. We know how to define relationship between siblings, between lovers, between parents and children, but how do you define relationship between two large categories such as the nation and the diaspora, or of the people who are in the nation state and those who are outside the state? All these things are difficult to define, difficult to operationalize. Especially when we're talking about very large categories, North America and Israel, somewhat equal in size, that have distinct differences between them from a perspective of culture, language, political context, and so forth, and also huge amount of variations within each group, as we know that there's no unity and uniformity within Israeli society or within world Jewry. Having said all that, it is I think, even though I'm speaking to you on Zoom and I don't see the responses directly, I assume we all have some kind of an intuitive, emotional, visceral sense that there is something real about this term Jewish peoplehood, and when it comes into a test, as I would argue about October 7th, we really feel that it's working, it's there, regardless of how accurate our definitions might be. And indeed, October 7th was a very tragic but a clear demonstration that the term Jewish people, I think, does hold in a substantial way. For those of us who are slightly older than 50, this also was a reminder that we've seen similar situations, primarily around 1967 and 1973, where there was a sense that there was an acute danger or threat to the existence of Israel, and world Jewry very quickly kicked in, rallied, mobilized, and acted very, very fast in order to at least alleviate some of the stress of those times. And this is what happened on October 7th. The Jewish world very quickly, it was really amazing to see. I would even say within hours, and if you don't want to say hours, you can say a few days, immediately changed every priority possible and mobilized. There were at least 4 expressions that I can recall of how the Jewish world responded immediately after October 7th. The first, of course, and it's also the familiar one, and that is raising of funds for anything that could relieve some of the trauma of Israel. I think the plug number from North America is about $1 billion from the federated system in North America. And I'm sure there are many other sources. Money doesn't only flow through one channel. Many other alternative, channels and venues for conduits for transferring of money. So that was the first thing. The second thing was rallies and also spiritual expressions, special religious services, prayers that were written, ceremonies, and so forth. There was a lot of that stuff. I'll show some images in a few seconds. The third thing that also reminds us of what it was also in other cases was solidarity missions. Immediately, there was a huge flow. Maybe some of you were on these missions in one way or another, of these just to come and be with us, observe, hug, relate, assess the needs, and so forth. And the last thing, which is tied into also to the solidarity missions, is volunteering. Really, just helping in agriculture, helping in soup kitchens, helping in all kinds of logistical efforts. These were all very strong expressions of solidarity. And if I would say that the Jewish people was brought into a test in that moment, I think it passed the test with high marks. And I'm talking, of course, about the organized Jewish world, but it really was all over. It wasn't just in official community organizations such as federations, but also in the grassroots level, synagogues, JCCs, youth movements, student organizations, and so on and so forth. And Israeli society responded very strongly to that. I think even though Israelis sometimes are either unaware of, somewhat cynical, dismissive of world Jewry, this I think touched the hearts of Israelis in a very serious way. I'll just show one example, and then I have a text also that demonstrates. This is a report. I'm holding a booklet, a report that says in Hebrew, "Omdim Meuchadim," standing united. American Jewry. I apologize that there are no Canadians here because it was funded by the Ruderman Foundation, American Foundation. American Jewry in Israel in the first month of the war. And there's a report here of all the different expressions and statements and statistics. And this was, commissioned and published and circulated among many Israelis, opinion makers, and the press, and so forth. And the press itself also, I think, portrayed a lot of the efforts of world Jewry on behalf of Israel in those days. By the way, for those of you who are a little concerned, in the small amount of time that I have left, I will also talk about the deterioration of the relationship between world Jewry and Israel in the last 2 years. But I do want to spend a few minutes also reminding ourselves that we had some very, very powerful moments of genuine solidarity, and I wouldn't use the word unity because I don't like to use it too much, but certainly a genuine expression of solidarity and a desire to extend a hand to the pain of Israel. But because I'm talking too much, I also went back to my files, and I saw that I myself collected some of the images of those first few weeks into a PowerPoint presentation, which I used several times when I was teaching Israelis about how Jews around the world responded. And I'll just take you through a global, a 30-second tour around the world as I put on this slideshow. Just let me know if you see it.
Yeah, you see it.
So this is an original. I didn't change this presentation. This is something I did close to 2 years ago to teach Israelis how world Jewry's solidarity with Israel took place. And I pulled out just kind of random images that I found. And you can just see this is a prayer service from a synagogue on the Upper West Side in New York. Synagogue or community gatherings. Some of them have the titles. Here we are in London. Then we are in Sweden, in Boston, Cleveland. There will be Toronto. I think we're in Toronto now. You might have been in those gatherings. In Hungary, in the Doheny Synagogue. Australia, New York, and again in New York. I just don't see the title. I need to move some bar here. Yeah, Austin, Texas. I think the images themselves, you see crowded places, you see people with all kinds of, you kind of get the emotion from these images, and so on and so forth. We're about to finish it. But here I want to stop and read a text that was in an interview, in a podcast that Dan Senior did with a very prominent Israeli journalist. He's a commentator and a specialist in geopolitical issues, Nadav Eyal, very mainstream Israeli journalist. And he talks about his feeling as an Israeli in these early days of the war, when he noticed as an Israeli the pouring love and support from world Jewry. And he says the following: I need also to acknowledge the support that the Jewish community has given to Israelis since the beginning of the war. I cannot think about anything more meaningful as far as Jewish peoplehood as what has happened right after Israel was attacked on October 7th. The sheer investment of time, of money, and mostly of sentiment by Jewish communities around the world has been so touching. And when Israelis felt that they are completely alone, it was you, Dan, the interviewer, and people like you that have been there with Israel. And I find this life-changing. It changed my life in the way that I perceive the Jewish people, in the way that I perceive the diaspora, in the way I should explain to Israelis about the Jewish diaspora. So you see that in this expression, it's not only about, oh, thank you, we needed more supplies or more food or more money, thank you for doing this. It also opened the consciousness of a thoughtful Israeli to the issues of Jewish people far beyond the actual support that was provided in those days. So that was kind of my brief summary of the good news, so to speak, of how world Jewry responded to the calling, and also how Israelis felt that this was genuine, and in some ways this is a very bad use of the term. In some ways, it was like a honeymoon in the relationship. I don't think the word honeymoon is appropriate in any form or sense here, but you understand what I'm trying to say. But clearly, things changed after that. This was a short-lived window of solidarity and of expressions of solidarity, not just on the emotional level, but also on the practical level, because starting sometime during the first half of 2024, the picture has changed. I'll just stay with a couple more images on this PowerPoint, and I want to return to the full screen. I so happened to be in April 2024 in one of my visits to my grandchildren in New York, and I stumbled over the first days of the encampment at Columbia University. Sorry, there's another slide here about American Jews rallying for the hostages. That's another wonderful chapter. I'll skip that because of lack of time. But then it so happened that I stumbled into the Columbia University campus because I went to some lecture there, and boom, I fell on the first day of the encampment of the protest against Israel. And you probably remember those images. They spread, of course, to other places, but it started at Columbia University. And here are some of the first images that the amateur journalist, took myself. And of course, it was very shocking, and we all followed what was going on there. So this will be the segue to my second part, and that is what happened after those really rare and unusual expressions of solidarity. So clearly, in the second half of 2024, there was a change in this kind of new phase of relationship that was short-lived, but still, I think it has a mark on us until today. I'll first say, from an Israeli point of view, that was the time that Israel returned to the divisive and real inner conflict of what's going on in Israel and how is this war being managed. If there was also a few months of unity and solidarity within Israeli society, sometime in the spring of 2024, that was pretty much gone when it was clear that the war is dragging, ceasefire is not coming, the hostages are not being returned, and of course the left in Israel thinks that Netanyahu has had a vested interest in prolonging this, and the right thought that Netanyahu is the best thing that ever happened to Israel, and Israel was moving in these two, Israelis were moving into these two very diverse sides. Of course, Israeli operations were so harsh and so aggressive, even if you accept them, that the images immediately flipped to the destruction and then later on to the starvation and to the human suffering of Gaza. Fact, yes, but commentary, or how do you interpret it, it could go in different ways. The image of Israel changed radically in those months. It started maybe a little bit before, but in the spring of 2024, that became very clear that Israel is perceived by many countries, groups, and segments of world population as the aggressor, as the immoral side of this equation. And Jews, especially young Jews, found themselves in a much more difficult emotional and ideological situation, trying to navigate the solidarity with Israel that came into force before with the image and the actions of Israel afterwards. And then comes also the broader anti-Semitic climate that you in Canada are experiencing, and all these things challenged this chapter of solidarity in a very serious way. And I assume you all have thoughts about it, and you experienced it, and you have been talking about this around your Shabbat tables and listening to rabbis' sermons, sometimes trying to avoid the subject because it's so difficult and it tears families apart, and religious leaders also have difficulties navigating their messages between different factions within the community. All these things are they're your experience. I'm a very passionate observer of these processes, but I'm not in them in the direct way. However, we are now in a kind of a third chapter of this emerging story, because the ceasefire that was announced close to 2 months ago, and the return of the living hostages and most of the bodies of the dead hostages certainly brought some kind of a stabilization. At least there's a sense that we can breathe, and there's some capacity to reflect and maybe to think in broader terms. Although I must say that the political tensions in Israel are continuing to be extremely strong, and they move from one topic, from one sphere to the other. If before it was about the lack of the government to the reluctance of the government to end the war and return the hostages, now it's the reluctance of the government to have an inquiry and to really take responsibility for the disaster of October. So everything is moving. The politics are moving to a new field, but it's really the same kind of division, and of course anticipation for national elections that will take place within the next year. Still, having said that, we are in a more calm and stabilized stage in which we can think about perhaps about the future, about some of the trends. There's also the geopolitical side of President Trump imposing his ideas of what the Middle East should look like. Some of it can comply with even some of the visions of us progressives in the conversation. Some of us were just astonished to see how Trump is just playing with our region as if is kind of his toys. But we're still left staying with my topic. I would say that the question that we should ask ourselves and observe is, I just outlined a few of them. What will be the narrative of the next phase? Will we go back to some kind of a normalization of Jewish life in which we are moving into a process of political arrangements in the Middle East that will relieve us from being in the center of the world and also being perceived as the aggressors of the world, into something which is a little more proportionate to other conflicts in the world and other situations in which we can go back to our real size. Will normal activities of Jewish life resume, such as, for example, Jewish tourism to Israel, which came almost to a complete stop? Will we have those types of activities that we had to put aside during the emergency days? What will Israeli leadership look like after the coming elections? There will be elections in Israel within the next 11 months. Trust me, it might be before, and there's a good chance there will be a change in the political regime that will lead us. And what will Jews around the world think about when they think about Israel? Will they think about how do we join forces to rehabilitate Israel, to bring Israel into a place that is more democratic, fixing some of the inequities that we had until now, working on shared society, and applying some of the humanistic Western democratic values that we felt that Israel can really be an example of. And here I hope that we'll be able, because it's mostly a challenge with a younger generation, most likely not present in this conversation, will we be able to mobilize young people to see, young Jewish people, I mean, who have some foundation of caring about Israel from their upbringing, from their homes and their education, to see the partnership with like-minded Israelis to bring Israel to a better place as their organizing principle, rather than being antagonized by Israel and turning their backs to Israel, whether in apathy towards Israel or harsh criticism of Israel that is far beyond the proportional criticism that Israel deserves. So I don't know where we're heading in that direction, but I do like to suggest that the organizing principle will be partnership between world Jewry and Israel in taking Israel into the next phase after the trauma and the difficulty of the war. So back to my opening statement about the definition of Jewish peoplehood. Hopefully we will be able to move away from a level of common fate and difficult stories that that inform our identity, to a common destiny of tikkun olam, of making the world a better place. I'll stop here.
Thank you, Ilan. Thank you very much for.
I never look at my watch, so I don't know if I remained within the time frame, but
You were fine.
so be it.
Yeah, you're fine. Let me first of all thank you for this presentation and framing some of the central issues that are facing us in the Israel-Jewish diaspora relationship and the whole question of peoplehood. Before I turn it over to colleagues on the panel, I want to push you on something, because your last comment was a comment of hope and optimism that the relationship between Israel and Jewish diaspora will emerge in a positive light. And having just returned from Israel a few weeks ago, I still have the same sense that on the right side of the continuum, the right side of the political continuum of Israel, we have many Israelis who don't have a strong sense of the importance of the relationship with the Jewish community in the diaspora, nor do they have a strong sense of this concept of Jewish peoplehood. And for them, if I'm right, and I'd like you to correct me if I'm wrong, they don't seem to care all that much. The current government and the people who support the current government don't seem to care all that much about the kind of questions and issues that you've been raising in terms of Jewish people in that. And that group of people within Israeli society isn't getting any smaller at this point. What do you say about how to deal with that segment of the Israeli society?
Okay, so here I would like to bring my professional experience as an activist in the area of building relationship between Israel and world Jewry, really from the late 1980s. It's about 35 years or so of work, and I'm putting for a second politics aside. It's almost impossible to do because everything is politicized here, including the fact that Israel has a minister of diaspora affairs who one of the things that he does is to antagonize diaspora Jews. So it's very hard to separate what I'm about to say from politics. But as I put politics aside and I look at it more from a sociological and cultural point of view, my analysis is that when Israel came into the world in 1948, and it was a result of the 50 or 70 years of Zionist activities before that, and of course the effect of the Holocaust, and Israel became a political entity, and most of world Jewry, the remaining world Jewry shifted to the West, primarily to North America. There was a huge disconnect on the cultural level between Israel and world Jewry. People didn't know each other, didn't travel from one side to the other. The lack of awareness, or not awareness, but familiarity with one another was extremely high, and the relationship was managed basically by politicians, by Jewish Agency, World Zionist, and Israeli politicians who had some kind of a of a reference point in order to transfer money and do some and do some work on really on the level of the most superficial aspect of the relationship. But starting in the 1980s, and I can speak about this for hours, there was a shift in the relationship from a cultural perspective as a result also of changes in in global trends such as, instant communication, easier flight, travel modalities, and also some very powerful initiatives that came from the Jewish world and even from Israeli governments that exposed diaspora Jews to Israelis and vice versa in scale and quality that we've never seen before. So if someone who grew up in the 50s and 60s in Israel, I would never have a chance to know anything about Jewish life outside of Israel. There was not a single system that could connect me to it. Today, people who grow up, and I'll talk about it from the Israeli side because that was your question, grow up in Israel, have multiple entry points into the possibility of getting a sense of what Jewish life outside of Israel is about. It might happen to them during high school, when they join a birthright group, when they're sent as shlichim, when the Israeli media has much more exposure towards world Jewry. For example, just before the war, there was a 4-part series in the main public channel of Israeli television, the Kan 11, about American Jewry, that more than 1 million Israelis watched it, and there are many more opportunities on both sides for mutual exposure. The project of Partnership 2000 that now is called Partnership Together, and so on and so on. So from a sociological, cultural, educational point of view, there's much more interaction between Israelis and Jews around the world than ever before. The problem is that it's contaminated by the toxics of politics. And the toxic political climate in Israel often portrays Jews in North America as progressive. That means that they're on the wrong side. Not seriously religious. That means reform. Diluted religion. So it's in the service of Israeli orthodoxy. And when it comes in recent years, also it comes to not standing for the interests of Israel. And that is a very negative development that goes against the success of educational projects that we worked so hard with blood, sweat, and tears to achieve, and come the politicians and just destroy our work in the name of their political interest, which you can imagine what they are. So I'm sociologically optimistic, even though politically I'm quite despaired, that we are not in a bad situation. And I can tell you from scores of experiences that Israelis are touched to the core with genuine expressions of relationship with Jews around the world. And Mark, I assume that you also have these experiences from your own side, not only with your Anglo friends in Israel, but with other experiences that you had over the years.
Thank you. Let me turn to Rabbi Kate, and we'll open it up to the panel. Rabbi Kate.
Thank you, Mark. So, Ilon, let's imagine for a moment that a large Canadian synagogue was planning an intergenerational Israel trip for 1 year from now. Totally hypothetical. Children, grandchildren, parents, 3 generations going to Israel together. What is the most wonderful, meaningful, and important activity they could do in Israel to build a sense of Jewish peoplehood, in your opinion?
Great question. It's always good to take these big questions and put them into the planning a table of how do you make that into a program? So allow me first of all to put aside the challenge of an intergenerational program from the point of view of what do you do with the grandparents who want to go to sleep at 10 o'clock at night, the middle ones want to go drinking at 10 o'clock at night, and no one to babysit over the children. So
If the
we'll
children
put
are still awake at 10 o'clock at night, we have a problem.
we'll put that challenge aside because that's obviously a programmatic, a methodological challenge, which is not only specific to Israel, how to do it in intergenerational. There are very few cases in which you do intergenerational activities, but I think it is challenging, and it's a good idea also. So clearly, the three groups have three distinct different types of memories. The three layers of your group. The older people might remember some of the events that I mentioned before. The middle ones, yeah, and the children, of course, are kind of a clean slate, and they can absorb things in the way children do. So and by the way, you can apply the same thing. If you ask me now, how would I design a 10-day experience for Birthright Israel's university students? Because you have a tension here, and I've been involved in that for many years, of teaching Israel in a very methodic way. History, religion, modern Zionism, the conflict, innovations, the exotica of religion today, and so forth. So to do it like step by step, and then there's the just dropping people in the heart of the Israeli experience, whether it's Tel Aviv or the Machne Yehuda open market in Jerusalem, or in a Jewish Arab environment, and just say, observe, take in, look, participate, talk to people. We don't want to regulate the way you're thinking. We want to make it extremely natural, bottom-up experience of serendipity, whatever comes up. Israel is not a stage. It's not a Hollywood. It's not a Broadway production. It is it's a complex living reality. We take from it what you can. So I, as an educator, as a programmer, I would always try and find a blend between the structured, the formal, the stories. There are good stories to tell. There are difficult stories to tell. I wouldn't hide any of the difficult stories. Israel has a few stains in its history. I'm not just talking about since October 7th. And at the same time, let the natural Israel speak. Educators don't like to do that. It sounds a little bit too risky. By the way, I once participated, that's why I'm mentioning the Birthright. I participated in a research conference on Birthright, and I gave a paper that the organizers of Birthright didn't like. And I said, instead, because I don't know how many of you know how a Birthright program works, but it's extremely structured and extremely controlled. It could be a wonderful program, but very structured, very controlled. And I said, what if you bring these people to Israel, and you can do that also with a congregational trip, bring them to Israel, provide their basic needs, hotels and whatever they need in order to function, and just give them a free voucher to do whatever they want in Israel in the given time that you are spending there, whether it's a bus ticket or entrance fees or a dictionary or a tutor that someone who can walk with them, and just send them off and meet in 8 or 9 days, and everybody brings their stories and their experiences and they share. To me, that's a valid experiencing of Israel because it's unfiltered, it's not regulated, it's something which I think we really can't do to the extreme, but I would suggest maybe a blend of those things.
And
So
what's fascinating to me about what you've just described is that the element of unity and peoplehood is therefore defined by individual relationships between us. right? My sense of peoplehood will grow when I have, independent of the people who I go with necessarily, an experience of Israel, which is different than, arguably, a philosophical approach where one says that I want groups to experience certain high level moments in order to build group relationship. That my group relationship should have a relationship with this group that we call Am Yisrael. And I think that's a really fascinating perspective to say that the personal experience is actually more vital than the group experience.
I think you want to find a balance between the two because if you do the example of your congregational trip, you also want to strengthen your congregation
Right.
as part of this experience. You don't want just to send people off into their paths. You want to also bring this back as a way to build community, and that I totally respect, and that's why don't take my advice all the way.
Okay.
But in terms of the exposure to Israel, I do believe in the deregulated
Right. Real Israel, not
approach.
Disneyland Israel.
Yeah, not Disneyland, also not something that which is controlled by agents who have some kind of an agenda, because Israel doesn't really fit the work of the agenda. Israel is much more diverse, much larger. No, I wouldn't say that in the 1950s, where Israel was basically a very simple category. You can wrap your arms around it, and the range of diversity was like this. But now it's like bursting with different colors and shades and lifestyles and ideas, and therefore you cannot really, even if you want to control, you can't control. So that's my radical suggestion. Also, I like to destroy kill some sacred cows.
Shake the boat, kill the sacred cows. Okay,
And
John.
Kosher shchita, of course.
Of course, chas v'chalila.
let me turn it over to John Allen, who has a question or comment. John.
Sure. Thanks very much. Thanks, Ilan. That was terrific. So talking about this isn't really my formal question, but because the rabbi just said what he did, my quick question is, would you send them to the West Bank to see what's happening there? Secondly, but I'll just leave that one and move on to my other question, which is sort of a comment and question. I attended a meeting a few weeks ago in London of a group called the London Initiative, and it brings together Israelis and the diaspora from around the world in categories of philanthropists, activists, and political, people involved in the politics of peoplehood, both in Israel and in the diaspora. And their focus was liberal democracy, secure peace, and societal fairness. So really focused on Israel, on the next election, and where is Israel going. But I raised this because one of the major concerns that came up was the future of the next generation, that third group that the rabbi was talking about, and how so many of our children and other people's children have lost connection, not with Jewishness necessarily, some with Jewishness, that's inevitable. I think people are losing connection with religion, but they've lost connection with Israel. Partly October 7 and following, not October 7, but following, and partly occupation, etc. And I think it's a crisis that we're all facing in a way as we get older and we see our grandchildren. I don't know where your grandchildren are coming from, but I'm kind of worried about mine. So I'd be interested in your views.
Yeah, so first of all, I agree with the diagnosis completely. So it's not a question of saying, oh, it's not as bad as you think. No, we're on the same page. This third generation syndrome, and it's not necessarily third generation, depends how you do the counting, but let's say it's the cohort of people who are 30 and under, or 35 and under. It's not exactly a biological distinction, but people who are beginning their adult life and shaping their worldviews and their political views. Clearly, there is a convergence of things that Israel has done that deeply disappoints them in a profound way, and to a certain degree in a justified way, that just Israel's conduct are unacceptable to them. I don't know exactly who I'm talking to in the broader group here, so I want to be respectful of people who might not think that Israel is acting necessarily in the same degree of that deserves criticism. So I want to be mindful of that. So on the one hand, there are young people, there could be older people, who are deeply concerned and disappointed and angry about the way Israel conducts its affairs, both in terms of the region, the conflict, and also in terms of the Jewish people. Lack of religious pluralism in Israel and things of that nature. Tied into that is what you might be able to articulate even better than me, is the fact that in the intellectual, cultural, even social milieu of many of the young Jews around the world, they live in environments where Israel was placed in the new deck of cards in the wrong side of the table, in the wrong side of the spectrum, of the good and the bad, the oppressors and the victims. Somehow with the discourse on colonialism and race theories and so forth, Israel has been placed in their milieus, the non-Jewish milieus, in the bad place. That puts them in an extremely difficult emotional and intellectual position. And when they also have a genuine critical perspective on Israel, because of what they know of what Israel is doing, that is a very difficult place to be in. Some of them might just check out and move away into a different, that's the flight option. And some will take on this new phenomena of I'm an anti-Zionist Jew direction. This is very tragic, very concerning. And I don't have a magic cure for that. But I think we do have a window, and that's the optimism part, when we do have an opportunity to engage in a conversation with people who might sometimes we feel that there's a kind of their eyes are glazed and they're not willing to talk about this thing, to say, come partner with those elements in Israel who are like-minded to you. And they exist, and they're not a marginal group. There's a sizable, I can dare say percentage, but I don't think that means much. There's a sizable group of like-minded Israelis who want the world to look like what you want it to look. And that is, I think, our challenge is to try and make these connections so they can work together. And if that will bring them also to the West Bank to help Palestinians harvest the olive trees when the settlers are trying to block them, then that will be their partnership. They'll do it together with like-minded Israelis. So I think here there is a serious window, because we're talking about a range of young people and the way they're antagonized by Israel. And there are some, I just met a couple of weeks ago through someone who you might know from Toronto, Stephen Pincus. He brought a group called Kaleidoscope, and he's very active as an alumni of Habonim. And he brought young Habonim activists from Canada and from the United States, very lefty, very, very liberal, but they are not willing to give up on Israel. Their response is engagement, activism. I love them.
They're terrific. They're terrific. And he was at the center of Hatikva and
Yes.
as you know. So, but
He's also a board member of the organization that I chair, the Jerusalem Intercultural Center.
Wonderful. Well, that's really great advice, and I think it's a message that we should get out. That's terrific. Thank you so much.
Thank you, John. Let me turn it over to David. David?
Thanks, Mark. Uh, Ilan, this has been fascinating. And your response to John's question has covered a lot of the things that I was prepared to ask. Um, so let me just pursue it a little further. Those of us involved in Canada and Artsenu, there's been a small working group that has been working on a educational program called Negotiating Shared Spaces. And it's aimed at school children. And it's now being trialed in the United States in Reformed congregations and in Canada. And this notion of shared spaces is not just a physical, but it's emotional, it's intellectual, it's identity. We can think of it in terms of gaps of understanding, so forth. And I'm wondering, as I mentioned in our pre-webinar conversation, your thoughts of how important it is while we focus on the things you just discussed with John, reaching out to the societies in which the diaspora Jews live. I mean, one of the things certainly that went that increased in a very positive way in the 60s and especially after 1967, through perhaps to the Camp David Accords, was an increasing ability of the Jewish community and diasporas, at least in Western democratic societies, to feel increasingly comfortable and empowered to have strong and open relations with the societies in which they were then citizens. Um, I think if you look at the history of what happened since that period, um, the increasing use of social justice themes, the norms and actions that come out of that started to raise real tensions between the NGO world of Western democracies and Jews and Israelis, because they seem to be on different courses, primarily, of course, as you would understand, around Palestinians. Um, so I'm wondering now, when you talk about Jewish peoplehood and its destiny, what did you say, from thinking
Fate
about a
and
common
destiny.
fate to a tikkun olam, that suggests that there's going to be a renewed relationship, at least in Western democratic societies where most diaspora Jews exist. Um, but it's unclear to me how that will occur, short of some very substantial, um, visible changes that only can occur in the Middle East between Israeli and Palestinian societies. And certainly, even before I retired from being an academic in Canadian universities, my sense was the gap was growing larger with that cohort that you and John were just speaking of, growing larger with the diaspora, with the non-Jewish world, but even growing larger, of course, within the Jewish diaspora of young people, which you've already referred to. So I'm wondering where you've been in the academic world, you're an activist, you do intercultural work, you focus primarily, it seems to me, on the intercultural communities within the Jewish world, but there's that big non-Jewish world, which seems to me we have to much more concretely and visibly address. And I'm wondering how you do that, um, in a diaspora world that is polarized, both within the Jewish and the non-Jewish components of it. And illiberal democracies are arising in both Israel and in the former liberal democratic West, which is neither so liberal nor so democratic anymore.
Well, clearly, the context of global trends and then country specific trends have an impact on these issues, and Jews within the respective countries are also struggling. I just spent, as a result of being married to a rabbi, I spent 2 weeks in Porto, Portugal, where she was serving as the rabbi for high holidays of a congregation of American expats who said that they're running away from America in order to find some refuge, and they found it in Porto, Portugal, and started a Reformed congregation. So so you have these movements also, and yesterday I just met a young woman, Jewish woman from Budapest, who is struggling with her Jewish life in Hungary, when on the one hand, Orban is actually supporting the Jewish community and helping them, and on the other hand, she can't stand the sight of him. And clearly in Israel as well, we are really in a crossroads of where we're heading towards, and we are dealing with some very, very difficult, I would almost call mutations of modern Jewish existence, and that's the ultra-Orthodox radical expansion, the settlers the fundamentalist core of the settlers, and also the voices of hatred and racism that come from certain segments of Israeli society. So all these things are in the background. I would argue that within Israel, and the West Bank here is clearly not what I'm referring to. Within Israel, there's actually an interesting social experiment going on of shared society that is evolving bottom up. Despite all these differences and the tensions and the threats that come from all directions, Jews and non-Jews in Israel are actually sharing the same space and building up a new social map that is something which we haven't seen. You see them working together in media, in the health system, in businesses, and there's something it's not ideological. It's just life makes it happen. So you have to also look at what is growing from below, and then hopefully you see, I'm a little stuttering here, not because my English is bad. It's because I really don't have. We live in a very messy world, and we need to strengthen what is growing in a healthy way and work together. So I'm sorry I couldn't really give you a good answer to a very good question.
Thank you, Elaine. John, David, do you have any other comments or questions? I think we can. If there aren't any questions from the participants. Yeah, one more, and then we'll bring it to a close. Go ahead.
Unmute. So let me just I think that the issue of the Jewish diaspora in Western society, I'm just wondering the extent to which Israelis understand it. My sense is that they have not understood the tensions that have emerged because of the conflation of being Jewish and being supportive of Israel. The rise of anti-Semitism, which you refer to in your opening remarks, um, not that anti-Semitism hasn't been present at one level or another within society, but the extent to which it emerged after October 7th, we know there is empirical evidence. It's striking. And we know it's at least partially because of this conflation. And we know it's also the conflation has been promoted because of the popularization of right-wing politics, but also extreme left-wing. They've come together in strange bedfellows here. So one of the challenges in this gap, it seems to me, in your interests as an educator and an activist, is to not just bring the Jewish community into a clear and more informed understanding of what's happening in the complexities of Israeli society, but also within the diaspora itself. And there is, I think, a fundamental challenge, the extent to which Israel is increasingly perceived as illiberal and the term is not orthodox, but religiously directed, runs counter to the norms and principles of living in a Western liberal democratic society. So if I were to be back in the university and teaching my courses on regional politics of the Middle East and peace and war in the Middle East, I think I would have to find ways to address this challenge. And I'm wondering what you're uncovering, because it certainly has become a pronounced sense of concern, at least in the Canadian diaspora. And as John had mentioned, we're among the more conservative of the Jewish diasporas. We're not as diverse as the United States. So there is a real resistance. And there is a presumption that those who are critical of Israel are anti-Semitic. I think that's is likely to be shown not to be correct more often than not, because more and more Jews are critical of the government of Israel. So this is a conversation I think we could have, but I don't want to prolong it. I just really want to pose it to you as the expert on having spent your professional and personal lives in two countries, both ostensibly liberal democracies, but both sliding away from those norms. And yet the relationship between those two countries and those two diasporas is the most significant that Israelis and Jews have.
Well, first of all, diaspora Jews and Israelis essentially are products of changes and challenges of the modern era that compelled them to, in most cases, to leave where the places they were at, move to new countries, develop new identities, and confront challenges. And it so happened that all these things fell into two places, North America and Israel, because 85% of world Jews are in those two locations. It's true that there's some interesting modalities in other places that are always fascinating to look at: the UK, France, Australia, and Portugal, as I mentioned. But basically, we are the story. The North American and the Israeli groups are the story. Within Israel, and within these two groups, you have similarities. You have ultra-Orthodox here and ultra-Orthodox there, and you have liberals here and liberals there. So in Israel today, I wouldn't say that the entire vessel of Israel is shifting to the illiberal direction. It's in flux. And the political circumstances that brought the current government together were circumstances, were not just a fundamental shift in the identity of the whole collective. It so happened that Netanyahu and his coalition got 51% and not 49%, and it can. So we're kind of split in the middle, and it's a spectrum. It's not just X or Y, and that's why there's a political arena to hash out these issues and try and push your agenda as much as possible. And when the politics don't work in your favor, you resort to other things. Protest, which we've shown some very, very impressive expressions of how to do protest and be effective in protest, not just vent our frustration. And of course, education and social change. So that's what we need to do.
I think that's a good comment and point on which to bring this to a close. And because you left us, you, Alon, together with John and David, and their questions and comments have left a lot of us with a lot of issues and things to think about. And it also impacts upon what we do within our congregations and our communities in terms of how we continue to develop and intensify our relationship with Israel, both as a community, as a congregation, and as individuals. And I'm hoping that in the future we can call upon you again to be with us as we explore these issues going forward. I want to really thank you for your time and your effort and, of course, your friendship. I want to thank all of you for being with us today, and to John and David for being on the panel. I want to remind all of you that our next session of Israel Dialogues will be in 2 weeks on Thursday, December 4th, 12 o'clock, Thursday, December 4th, at which time we'll be talking about October 7th, 2 years later, impact on Israeli society, but with a particular emphasis on shared society work and efforts and the impact on the work of NGOs in Israel and in Palestine. And with us will be the newly appointed CEO of Project Rosanna, Rand Goldstein, together with the director of Project Rosanna in Ramallah, Mohammed Asida, who will be talking to us about the impact on Project Rosanna as a case study for what's been happening in that sector. So that should be a very interesting session. I'm hoping you'll all be with us, and we'll look forward to seeing you then. Wishing you all a Shabbat Shalom and a peaceful and restful weekend. Thank you for being with us.
Thank you.
So nice to meet you.